green earth, probably combined with verdigris, probably over the green earth as a glaze to give that real brilliancy. So let me just tell you a little bit about some of the greatest sort of pigments in history. And so we're on that brink again between Renaissance and sort of the modern age. And ultramarine is one of those pigments that is great for storytelling. And I can show you many examples, but my favorite is always this. It's the girl with pearl earring, the 17th century painting by Jan Vermeer, and you can see how that blue is treated. It is absolutely brilliant, and at the time that would have been more expensive than gold. So most of his paintings were commissions. If there weren't, God knows how he could afford to source that really pure pigment. He avoided mixing it because it was so magnificent. And it's used here really as one of the key elements in this painting. And it was, you know, unanimously described as the most beautiful, most illustrious, you know, most perfect of colors, but hugely expensive because of where it was sourced and how it was sourced. This is a mineral pigment, and the story is in the name, ultramarino. It comes from across the sea, it comes from far away. So the raw material could only be found in a few places in the world, including some remote caves in Afghanistan, what is now Afghanistan. So imagine the romance of, you know, associated with that pigment. It comes from Afghanistan. It needs to be found. It needs to be transported, usually to Venice, and then it still needs to be made into a pigment. So the same principles apply. Find the good source material, bring it here, and Venice was the trading post to the east, and then you have to make it, and then you have to bind it in something good, and then you have to use it for something that sort of, you know, does it justice. And that is why the Virgin Mary, from about, in the Middle Ages, is dressed in blue, because that was the most expensive, or very important figures in paintings are usually dressed in blue. And here, here's just one example again from the National Gallery. Here is a Virgin Mary in a fabulous ultramarine blue gown. If you couldn't afford that, you could cheat, and you could have a cheaper blue underneath and then just give it a sort of, you know, a glaze of ultramarine. And on the right here, a secular image. So this is, you know, not for the church. This is a Titian, and currently can be seen, and all the Titians can be seen together at the National Gallery. This was recently cleaned. So now you can really tell the brilliance of the ultramarine used here for, again, the key figure, Ariadne, but also for the sky. It's a proper sky blue, whereas the water here in the background, I hope you can see my cursor, that's looking much more greenish, and that is a different kind of blue. That is an azurite, not quite as expensive. So what about ideas about color? What about proper color theory? When did people sort of really get to grips with the differences in colors, you know, subtractive and additive? Well, there's certain key points in history, and one of them is, for me, certainly, is Isaac Newton. This is really, it doesn't mean people didn't have ideas about color order or how color is created before Newton, but he was so systematic about researching it in his decades of optical studies, which he finally produced many years later in this large work, Optics, a treatise on light. This is about light, and he gives it away. He's concerned with immaterial color, and you probably know what he did. He in a darkened room, he directed a ray of sunlight through a three-sided prism, and that, of course, split the white light into what he thought or decreed were 7 colors, but he went one step further. He saw this and thought, okay, if this is the visible spectrum, these are the colors that we see, what happens if we split those colors? Do we then get, I don't know, 49 more colors? But of course that did not happen. When he brought all of these together again, through another prism or another hole in the wall, he got white light again. And that is the diagram I showed you at the beginning. You know, when a stage lighter, so, you know, brings all the colored light together, you arrive again at white. So basically this is what he did. This is a simplified diagram, and he decreed on a color wheel published in the book that the colors we see can be counted, and they are red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. 7 colors. And if you look carefully at his diagram, you see that they're not distributed evenly. So he's got the right idea, but there's a little bit of there's some other things coming in here. He is a scientist, but he also has other ideas. For example, he insisted on 7 colors and not 6 that we find on most color wheels, later color wheels, because he believed that there was an analogy to music, to the musical scales. Yeah, and he can also tell what time he was living in, because that extra color is indigo. So that tells you how much indigo was, was part of everyday life. That big discussion: should we let indigo come into Europe and kill off or threaten the indigenous woad industry? And this is one of the most important diagrams in the modern world. Just out of interest, this is how small it actually is in the publication. You sort of pull out this plate, and this is quite nice because you can keep on reading the text whilst looking at the diagram. This is the kind of thing I do in my spare time. I do research into color wheels. So that wasn't much used to painters, because he was greatly respected by artists, by illustrators and painters, but it wasn't much use because he was dealing with colored light, with immaterial or additive color. But soon after, people began to adapt his theories or his findings to the world of painting. And here is a great man in British history. This is Moses Harris. He was an entomologist, an insect specialist. So he had to know how to use colors well and how to accurately depict these insects, which came in sort of 100 shades of brown and gray. And because he was so acutely aware of this, of the importance of this, he created a short, very important work on color. And here it is. It was called The Natural System of Color. Of this book, there's a first edition in the 1770s and then a second edition, 1811. 7 copies survive or are known to survive, and he colored these wheels by hand. So can you imagine that? And this is an attempt at giving guidance to illustrators, to finding a reliable system of paint colors. And you can tell it's paint colors because look at the overlapping triangles. This is subtractive color. If you mix everything, you get back to very, very dark brown or black. It's taking the light away, basically. And of course, and this is by now a painter's wheel based on 3 primaries leading to 3 secondaries. So you have a basic structure of 6 colors on a wheel, and then you mix and mix and mix and mix, and you get further into the brown and duskier sort of ranges, which is important for painting insects, of course. So 1 wheel was not enough. He needed the compound wheel as well, and in total he has 660 shades on these 2 plates. And today, it's been quite a day for me. Today, one of these copies came up at auction, and my phone didn't stop ringing in the last few days because people know that I'm the expert on these sort of color books, and everybody wanted to know from me, how much is it worth and what should we pay? And it was hugely exciting. It sold for £12,000 plus buyer's premium. So it'll be £15,000 or something like that. So really exciting. And I'm going to get to see it because the person who bought it also called me and asked me to do something with it. It's fabulous. He should be much better known, Moses Harris. And then really color came into its own, and this is the late 18th, early 19th century. And you can see, next time you go into the Royal Academy, look up, and above you in the entrance hall, you will see allegorical paintings to do with the arts. And there's 4 of them painted by Angelika Kaufmann. And the elements are composition, invention, design, and color. And that's a new thing, because until that time, and Reynolds was still very sort of, he found color still quite dubious. What a painter should learn is to draw well. And so color was considered a bit garish, but because the world was becoming more colorful, it suddenly went up in the ranks, in the hierarchy of the elements of the arts. And what I love about this one here, the allegory of painting or of color, is that Kaufmann combines Newton's studies, the rainbow, the visible spectrum, the rainbow colors with material colors. So she dips her paintbrush into the rainbow. So she brings those two worlds together. There are other fascinating things that happen in the wake of this. More and more paint manuals are being published. And here's the first one by a woman. This is Mary Gartside, who publishes this extraordinary book in 1805. And all of this is still hand-colored. And all of these books refer back to Newton, sometimes Moses Harris, and other 18th century authors. And then, of course, this is my countryman, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, and I have to mention him here because he published a huge book several books on color. And like Newton, experimented for decades, then brings out this huge work. Although he's known as a poet and playwright, he considered himself a sort of part-time scientist, and he thought his doctrine on color was his most important work. And also he was quite full of himself and thought it was the most important work on color published, until that time in 1810. And but he first published on color, or on optics, in 1791. And you can see how he's sort of using prisms. And in fact, that edition of the first book came with a prism included to encourage you to recreate his experiments. And he was vehemently anti-Newton. And that's because he was a romantic. He thought, oh, he's too scientific. He's taking the romance out of the rainbow. And he wasn't the only one. There were a lot of British poets who wrote verses about this. How dare you, destroy our romantic notion of the rainbow. So here is that huge work on color in which he slams Newton. There's a whole polemic part which is anti-Newtonian. He himself created color wheels, very much in a painterly fashion, or with painters in mind, but also in true romantic fashion. He assigns other values to color, and that's not a million miles from Newton and his ideas about music. So on the left here, he thinks certain colors can be linked to certain character traits, to the four temperaments, and even to professional activities. What kind of character type you are. What he doesn't do, and Moses Harris doesn't do that either, although they're all sort of dealing with this problem, is if you have a color wheel and you stay in the two-dimensional world, where are the lighter shades, where are the darker shades, where are the browns, where are the dark oranges, how do you do that on a color wheel? So Moses Harris tried and ultimately failed. So you had to be aware of that third dimension of color, and that is, how dark or how light it is. It's basically how much white or how much black do you add. And his friend and colleague, Philipp Otto Runge, almost got it right, because he gives us a color ball or color sphere rather than a color wheel. So he does go three-dimensional. And I don't know whether you can see that. Can you see me? Behind me, I've got this color globe. I've been looking for a long time for a model of Runge's color globe. And I know that an American color scientist produced one in the early 20th century, but I couldn't find one. So I had one made for me, because I'm absolutely convinced that Runge will have had one, or perhaps even Goethe. So it's another dimension of color. And just to also point out a really, really important man who hardly anybody knows about, this is George Field. He's another great British so-called color man, and he really called himself a color man. Being a color man meant that you were making pigments, testing pigments, supplying artists with materials and so on. And he published about it as well, which is why we know so much about him. And he was very, very, very much concerned with the quality of pigments and paints, and he tested them for their durability. So he was both a maker of paints, and he has a typical color man's shop from George Field's lifetime. But he also, like Newton, like Goethe, had other ideas. So here are just a few examples of his fabulous, important books. And he had a long life, so he published for a long time, and his work was bought up by Winsor and Newton, who kept publishing it in different editions. So it's all very well, the usual idea of color scales and color wheels and so on. And can you see that one in the middle? It's that recurring idea of music and color, that they're somehow linked. But he also believed in a holy trinity of colors. He was a practicing Christian, and he believed that the three primary colors represented the holy trinity. So it's you know, science and art and religion, they all overlap. And you may not know of him, but you will be aware of his work, because he did produce very high quality pigments. And they were bought by people like Sir Thomas Lawrence and the Pre-Raphaelite painters. And of course, Pre-Raphaelite art is known for its brilliancy. That's what they wanted to achieve. But also for being relatively stable. So there's, on the whole, not a lot of restoration or conservation work necessary. And here are just two examples of these vibrant colors. And we know that they were keen on buying George Field patented pigments. It was also an age where the world just simply became more colorful, and that's to do with the industrialization. So you get in the early 19th century, and as we go through the 19th century, much more machinery, tools. We get steam power, which helps, for example, print colorful wallpaper. And we get fashion magazines that tell you what colors are fashionable. So there's a much higher turnover, there's much more design. And this is one of the best known, Ackermann's repository of arts. So you can see the world taking on color. But again, it's got to do with what is available. And why were there so many more books, so much more writing about color? Because color became more accessible and more affordable. And it begins in about 1760 with caked watercolor paints. So you can pick up, you know, a little brick, a little sort of tiny bit of paint, and you can take it with you, and you can paint outdoors. And this, so it becomes portable and less messy. So you get watercolor boxes, or as in the case here, Queen Victoria's watercolor satchel. Yeah. And I could go on, but it's basically, it accelerates more and more in the 19th century. And here's another name that must be mentioned. This is a Frenchman, Chevreul, who lived to the ripe old age of, I think, 103. And he benefits in the later 19th century from new printing methods. So lithography becomes much more common, and that means you can illustrate in a different way. But and he understands that how colors react with each other optically. He works for the Gobelin tapestry workshops in France, and he realizes that, you know, you use brightly colored wool and you use it in your tapestries, and then if you see the finished tapestry, it suddenly looks dull. So what was the reason for that? And the reason was that colors can cancel each other out if they're too close to each other. Whereas if they're on opposite sides of the color wheel, they enhance each other. So that's the law of simultaneous contrast. But what he also does is he publishes beautiful books where he again tries to do what Moses Harris started. He tries to give us the whole range, and he tries to go three-dimensional. And he goes from the brightest, purest colors to the absence of light by adding darkness. And we're so getting closer to the ideas of the color of the universe or outer space. So here are his color wheels, and these are lithographs. And the last one is complete absence of light. And that means darkness. It means black. So these are sort of, you know, 50 shades of black that he ends up with. Yeah, but on a more positive note, we get a lot more synthetic pigments in the 19th century, and this leads to, of course, the Impressionists, the Post-Impressionists, and the Expressionists, being able to use color very intuitively, from squeezed out of tubes, ready-made. They can take them anywhere, and color becomes an expressive tool in that age. And I could give you whole lectures on that, but I'm sure you recognize, you wouldn't see this as London as you see it with the naked eye. This is an image of London as, you know, seen by this Frenchman. And here's Wassily Kandinsky, another of the great names of expressionists. And Kandinsky, of course, paints about color, talks about color, and he writes about color. And he publishes a small but very important volume, Über das Geistige in der Kunst, on the spiritual in art. And yes, it is a lot about spiritual ideas, but it is also about linking color and form. And of course, he worked for the Bauhaus group, and the Bauhaus group in Germany, until they were broken up by the Nazis, believed in teaching color as a main component of art education. And they had this utter belief in, you know, linking shape and color. And here you see it, you know, transformed into a design of a cradle. And this continues, and color remains a great source of inspiration for artists, and is the subject of a lot of artists' work. And this is what I chose as one of my examples in my big color book of contemporary art on color. This is Olafur Eliasson, and what I like about his work is it's a lot about color, but it's also about color and light. And he manages to combine the two. So he's Newtonian, but he's also a painter, if you want. So for example, he created this rainbow you can walk through with colored glass on the top of a gallery in Denmark. So how can we link this to your sort of area of expertise, to your area of interest? How can we link this to the cosmos? So let's talk a little bit about the deep blue sky and how artists and illustrators and scientists have sort of depicted the universe or the sky. And you could start by wondering why the sky is blue. And of course, there's two answers to this. And we have to really differentiate between the daytime sky and the nighttime sky. And based on what you've already heard, it's got to do with wavelengths and how light is refracted. So the sky during the day appears blue because, you know, particles, light is scattered in all sorts of directions. And during the day, all those tiny particles are sort of scattered all over the place. And blue wavelengths are shorter than red ones. So blue is scattered more than any other color. So we see this sort of hazy blueness of what we think is blue. At night, it's different. At night, what we see and what you see in space photography, what we see is the absence of light. So this is a bit like Chevreul. You know, you take light away and you end up with a nothingness, with a blackness. However, what we see a lot is an unwillingness to embrace the darkness, to embrace the blackness. And it usually, astronomical illustration hangs on blue. So let's go all the way back to ideas of the sky. And we don't know anything about cave painters, but we do know about Egyptian culture. And here we have a personification of the sky, and that's the goddess Nut. And I can hear night in that. Of course, it's not related etymologically, but she is the goddess of the sky, of the cosmos, possibly of women and fertility. And she is, of course, a woman. And she's quite often shown as blue. And she's also shown as sort of spreading her wings. She's a winged goddess, and she quite often creates a sky. So she sort of embraces everything else by creating a firmament, by creating a sky. But the Egyptians also thought quite literally about putting blue on the ceiling to depict the sky. And note, it is blue, it is not black. And the same principle applies in a lot of sort of in the Christian era, in a lot of religious art. And here, possibly one of the most beautiful depictions of both the physical sky and the spiritual sky. This is the Scrovegni Chapel in Padua, near Venice. And here we have Giotto playing this relatively small but tall space. And this is, this is an utterly religious place, and the heaven and the sky are depicted in this fantastic blue, and it's literally above us. It is a symbol. It's a depiction of the sky, but also a symbol of eternity and of Christianity in general. Blue is always the background. And you can ask me about that pigment if you like later on. So this idea of showing the cosmos as blue, we see in religious art, in most religious art. This is a 19th century church here in Brighton. And when I look at this is clearly, an illustration of the book of Genesis. There's day and night. What is the background? Why isn't it black? I wondered. Why, if it's all about light and no light, why isn't the background black? Why is it black? Well, think about it. Can you actually create a black church window, or would there be much point? In a way, you need something more tangible. You need something more relatable than complete absence of light. If that was a black sooty window, it wouldn't have the same effect. So again, materials matter, and the visual impact matters as well. An attempted realistic depiction of the sky, albeit in a religious context, is seen here. This is Jan van Eyck again. And here we have him giving us a pretty realistic sky in the context of the crucifixion of Christ. This is an altarpiece, it's the one on the left here. And not only that, so the sky looks good, it looks, and he's attempting perspective as well, but crucially, he also gives us the moon. And the moon is painted accurately and with the right Maria. So it's a very curious, fascinating combination of a religious work of art by a religious artist, but observing the sky and trying to depict it naturalistically. There's still the whole symbolism of the moon attached to death, and especially, of course, here the death of Christ. But it is that combination of science, observation, and art and religion. Another great example of a blue religious sky, realistically painted, more or less, is this small painting by Adam Elsheimer. Again, little known, but hugely important. It is, of course, the flight into Egypt. So, biblical story. We can read up all about the story, but see how he depicts it. And look at the year as well. This is 1609. So we have the whole symbolism of the night, and we have wonderful sort of, composition of the painting, that diagonal line going through the different light sources, the Holy Family seemingly sort of glowing by themselves. And the whole story, that whole biblical story, is set against the cosmos. Here we have the night sky, and that is realistic. Almost all the star clusters are accurate, but more importantly, it's the first accurate depiction in Western art of the Milky Way. And the moon is also quite good. But look at the date. This is 1609. And we can tell by the moon and by the constellations that he painted this. Adam Elsheimer painted this in Rome on the 16th of June in 1609. Yeah, so that is how accurate it is in a so overtly religious painting. And why is it so accurate? Because he had a telescope. This is very soon after the invention of those very crude first sort of Dutch trunks, the telescopes. But we're also talking about color here. And this is how I found it on the internet, but I have seen this painting and it's a lot more blue than it looks. So these are pictures that I took with my camera, which is rather wonderful. And just by comparison, here are Galileo's and Thomas Harriot's early drawings through a telescope of the moon, which is all about sort of really just identifying surface features of the moon. so color doesn't come into it, but it's just a nice comparison, seeing how an artist uses this, the same tool, the same scientific instrument as the scientists. And then a bit later in that century, we have this wonderful example, Maria Clara Eimert, who was an astronomer and had a telescope and was very serious about depicting astronomical features, and she did so beautifully. These are pastels, and interestingly, and about 350 survive, and almost all of them she painted and drew on blue paper. So she chose blue. She did not choose black as an evocation of the universe, of outer space. Of course, we know that's not true. It should really, by law, be black. But here are these very, very beautiful, accurate and evocative paintings, which are now hugely popular so as postcards. They have a sort of a very broad appeal, far beyond anyone interested in astronomical history. Very, very few are painted on grey card rather than blue card, and I think they're almost as fascinating to look at as John Russell's later pastels of the later 18th century, which are also against a blue background. They were recently seen at Greenwich, of course. So we're nudging towards the Romantic Age, and I've mentioned Goethe already, and I really, in terms of how the sky, the evening sky, the night sky are depicted and what it means, I have to tell you a few more things about Romantic art, and this is the lunar age, or the lunatics age, as some called it. We have from the late 18th century and well into the 19th century a sort of movement, the Romantic movement, which are not against science, not against taxonomic classification and accurate observation, but with all this Enlightenment knowledge and all these achievements, they felt that we should really come back to ourselves. We should look back and see how we fit into this great universe. So we were learning more and more about what is out there. By then, telescopes had of course evolved. We were sort of charting the moon, and you should they thought we should just bring it back to ourselves and see how we fit in. And religion plays a part, but spiritualism probably more so than a particular religion. And many painters, poets, and writers used that and wrote and talked about this. And here is the greatest of those lunatics. This is Caspar David Friedrich, who used the sky, the moon and stars, the heavens in general, as a great symbolic tool. And this is how he does it. He puts little people in his pictures, human figures, and they're usually shown from behind. So you can you can become one of those figures, and they look out to the cosmos, and they do ask themselves, where do we fit in? And that was of course one of the big questions of the Enlightenment. How does it all fit together? Where are we in that sort of big taxonomical chain of classification? So here the blueness of course stands for distance, but also for melancholy, and also for contemplation, and for anything that is out there. And you can see that this is probably his most famous work, which is a daytime scene, but still it's about that looking into the distance and thinking about the cosmos rather than sort of accurately depicting it. And here's perhaps the best example. This is Friedrich's Monk by the Sea. This is essentially seascape, but it shows us, much, much more. The vast, most of the painting is taken over by the sky over the sea. And he's going into that blueness, into infinity and into space. And the figure is now tiny, tiny, tiny. And again, it's much bluer and much smaller than you think. So I'm showing you these just to give an idea how the color blue, and also a good painter, can create the whole universe, can create the cosmos in a relatively small painting. So the Friedrich is surprisingly small, but so is the Alzheimer. Look how tiny it is. but it's giving us the whole universe. And just to finish, of course, this continues, and we could sort of string this out, but I'm sure you will find your own examples in visual culture, in pop culture, in film, and in music, where the color blue stands for the sky and much more, the distance, and therefore melancholy, because that's what you do. It brings you, it makes you think and makes you contemplate, and that can tip into depression and melancholy, as we saw it, of course, in Pablo Picasso's blue phase, which you see here in the middle. On the left top there, we have Edward Munch, again, lonely figures staring into the distance, and they're usually printed or painted in blue. Then, of course, there's the blues, the music that is a lot about hardship and, again, reflection, contemplation. Joni Mitchell's Blue, where she goes down a blue river. It can have other connotations such as strength and vitality, and the expressionists and post-impressionists use that a lot, including Kandinsky. So if we come back to my title slide, here we have what you probably wouldn't consider an astronomical image, would you? It's a very expressive painting. It's by one of the most expressive painters of them all. This is Vincent van Gogh, who used new synthetic pigments to create these great contrasts. And he wrote about this, and he read about this and wrote letters about it. He knew full well how to use a color wheel to maximum effect. You see what he does here. It's the yellows and the blues, they're complementary colors. And you think this is all about emotion. He paints the Starry Night in Saint-Rémy. It's shortly before he killed himself, actually. And he gives us this swirling sky, night sky with a sickle moon. But actually, as expressive and as subjective and as emotional as this is, again, like with the Alzheimer, we can actually date this pretty accurately. So he did actually get the positions of the stars and the moon and the phase of the moon right. It's not depicted realistically, but he did observe accurately, even in his disturbed state of mind. And the same applies here. And this is a classic lesson in sort of how to use a color wheel. So just as a reminder that really artists also use science, and scientists can also be artists. And it's perhaps no surprise that the color blue, or a color blue, a synthetic pigment, was also called cerulean blue. This is, of course, the sky blue. And I don't know whether we have a couple of minutes, but if you just let me show you this first modern pigment, Prussian blue. Well, this is called the first synthetic pigment. It's an iron compound, and it made possible creating vast spaces in blue. And it's a lot cheaper than ultramarine. And here you see, for example, Turner using it in watercolor to create what? Well, a wonderful, watery, so blue sky above the water. Prussian blue was also used as a cheap print material, print color, for example, in early stamps. This is the blue Mauritius, but also again by the Japanese to depict the sky. That is all those Hiroshige and Hokusai prints are printed with this new European pigment, Prussian blue. And this blueness in astronomical images, whether they're fictional or whether they're scientific, continues. And I think it is partly our fear of black, of nothingness and of absence. So here we have one of the first great sort of scientific films, Frau im Mond, the woman in the moon by Fritz Lang. And although the film itself was of course black and white, this is 1929, all the advertising material showed the cosmos as blue, and that continues. And also, since I'm a collector of books related to the moon in particular, but astronomy in general, it is quite noticeable how many of these books and other materials, such as Soviet space race propaganda, how 9 times out of 10 They're bound in blue. They use blue as a background color. Even my own book, which I didn't design, this was designed for me by the publisher, uses blue rather than black for the moon, for the moon, for example. So in most cases, it's in the cosmos is inaccurately depicted as blue, even in pop culture, such as Doctor Who, where the spaceship is even blue. With a few notable exceptions, and I do look out for them. Here's Tintin's sort of, books about the journeys to the moon. I think they're sort of 1940s, mid 40s, maybe late 40s. And here, interestingly, the cosmos is depicted as black, accurately as black. And of course, we know when we made it to the moon, of course, we knew, or when we made it to outer space, we realized that space is really the absence of light unless there is a light source. So here we have some of the Apollo photographs knitted together, and they look colorless, but of course they're not. But this is the monochrome appearance of the lunar surface, and then the black nothingness behind it. But blue, of course, came in with this image, and I won't need to tell you anything about the impact of this image. It's probably the most important photograph, certainly possibly image of the 20th century. And what matters here is the blueness. This is us in deep black, cold space. And we are blue. Blue is life. Blue is the water, of course. But we also know it's how light refracts, of course. And what a contrast it must have been to that first image of Earthrise, which was still in black and white. So I hope you enjoyed it. And I want to finish with this little thing. I hope you can see me. And this is just another example of a book about, astronomy, about constellations, about the night sky being printed or produced in black. This is a book from 1861. And what I love about it, it's a little atlas of the stars. And I've got it here. And can you see how small it is? This is because it had to fit into a pocket. This is someone in the Victorian age going out with this little book, looking at the sky, and so making notes about what he saw. And most of it is plates. And I'll show you a few. And they're all blue. They're all blue. They're printed in Prussian blue because that was cheap. It was a good, strong, solid blue. And I think somebody mentioned the Leonide showers. So here is a person the owner of this book in 1872. He was in Cookham, August the 12th, and he clearly saw that constellation. Look at the deep blue sky in that little book. It's not black, it's blue, because we want it to be blue. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.
Hello.
Right, good. We can get my machine crashed halfway through, but I don't think it made any difference to everyone else. Well, I hope not.
Yeah, I ended up approving a few people because somehow I became the host for a bit.
Yeah, somebody became the host automatically.
I think it just flicks it over. Right, questions. You can. Oh, Brian.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I didn't mean to jump in. I had a couple.
Brian, sorry.
Is that okay? Sorry. It's a wonderful talk. Thank you. I really loved the subject, and it was lovely to see all those images, and that was inspiring. You didn't mention lapis lazuli. Is that another name for ultramarine because it comes from Afghanistan?
Yes, it is the name it's the name of the gemstone. I should have mentioned that. So ultramarine was the rather romantic name with a small r given to the pigment.
Right.
Ultramarino from across the sea. And lapis was, of course, the raw material. Yes.
Okay. And there was just one other thing, if I may. I went to the National Gallery recently, and I specifically wanted to see the Wilton diptych. Yeah. Which is exquisitely beautiful.
It's absolutely exquisite, yeah.
And the right panel, so for everybody's, it's an altarpiece, and it's in two. It's a hinged altarpiece, and it's in two parts. The left side shows Richard II kneeling before three saints, and on the right hand side are a group of angels, and they're handing Richard the baby Jesus. And the right hand side is, well, both panels are exquisite, but the right panel is beautiful blues of the wings.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that's egg. I think, is that right? Do you know how it was? I think it was done in egg.
It should be egg tempera, but
I think it is.
Yeah, I think it must be. It is so absolutely glowing, partly because it could be closed and was probably cared for, well. It's the sheer quality of the materials. So no matter whatever the binding is, these are the most expensive pigment, and of course it's also heightened with gold. So the angel's wings are sort of, they have little gold flecks on them. And they're also, it's not called punched, they have sort of, indentations, so they're tooled.
Right.
And the pigment is, of course, ultramarine. That is the purest, and it's not adulterated.
Unbelievably beautiful.
It's just absolutely unbelievable. It is one of the greatest works of art in this country. Yeah, do go and it is it is still a shrine, isn't it? It's you walk in and you used to be able to sit in front of it. It is just spectacular. It's the best blue after Egyptian blue.
Yeah, it's exquisite. You've got to see it. It's just it's in a glass box on its own.
Yeah, and like with the Vermeer, I think in this work it was only mixed with white and not with any other pigments.
Right, because we don't know who painted it. I think, is that right?
No.
So anyway, thank you. That was really, really great.
You're very welcome. Chris Hooker is raising his hand.
Hi, yeah, thank you, Alexandra. That was a very interesting talk. I had a question. You showed some of those lunar sketches. I can't remember the name of the woman who painted them, but they were on the blue paper.
Yeah, Maria Clara Aimad.
Right. I wondered if there might be something other than some sort of technical reason why she chose to use blue. If you have such drawings on black paper, on a black background, there might be too much contrast. You're trying to see the features on the moon, which are fairly tonally bland. If you have a black background, they will become less visible, whereas with a blue background, you might find it easier to see them. And the same is true of the stained glass, actually.
Yeah.
What do you think of that? Is that a plausible?
It's a possibility. She didn't explain, but it was clearly a choice, because it wouldn't have been cheap to source blue paper.
Sure.
And some of the romantics do. You get a lot of sketches by Constable and Turner and the likes on blue paper, but that's for romantic reasons, to give it, to give the blue haziness of the romantic era. I think for Aimad, it's a very good point. Is that easier on the eye? Is that better to show features? It possibly is. Maybe there is too much contrast between black and white, but then we get black and white photography, which is splendid and is often better than sort of early color photography, because it's a possibility. We will never know, but it's a very interesting choice of paper, and also that it's such a common. It just goes through the whole of art. We are afraid of the blackness. We want it to be blue, but we also associate distance with blue, of course. Yeah, and as soon as light comes in, it does turn into blue. I mean, blue is the one color closest to black. Yeah. So just before you get the complete absence of light, you do get blue. So they are closely related.
Yeah, I mean, the atmospheric perspective of the blueness of the distance, due to the, again, light scattering in the atmosphere is the reason why the distance is blue and hazy.
True, yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Okay, Alan.
Yes, a very interesting talk. One of the things I've always been interested in is why in the Victorian age, amateur astronomers spent a lot of time looking at coloured stars. Double stars was one of the great bits of astronomical hobby. And they debated amongst themselves what the colours were. Somebody said it's turquoise, no it wasn't, it was blue. But there was a great debate about this, and this went on to about the early 1910, and that sort of interest waned and disappeared. People do still occasionally say nice double star, nice colours, but the interest in colours in stars waned. In your talk, you sort of talked about the interesting colour wheels and colour charts in the Victorian age. do you think that, I just wonder whether there was two things, that was the colour suddenly became quite interesting to people in the Victorian age, and that span off into people looking and trying to debate on colours and stars.
Quite possibly, yeah. I mean, it affected all areas of life, design, fashion, illustrated books. It took a while, but it became easier and cheaper to produce color illustrations. We're still a long way from color photography, of course, but yes, and it became more acceptable, and it became our world. It's a lot of it hangs on what is possible. So once it's possible to use steam power to produce rolls and rolls of brightly colored wallpaper and use synthetic pigments, you can just do it, and then you can buy it. And so all of that links together. I hadn't heard of this sort of color star watching, but it's, I shall look into that. Very interesting. Yeah, but I'm sure it's all linked. Color became acceptable. I mean, and the the culmination of this is the Great Exhibition of 1851, where all of this is on display. Anything we can produce in the world, but mostly here in Britain, is on display, and it is garishly colored. If you look at some of the things that are on display, and you have to look quite, you have to make an effort, because the catalogue is still printed in black and white. But anything you see of that time, especially in terms of furniture, it is so over top. It is too much. It's almost too much.
My Colours of the Stars.
Yeah, thank you. There was a book called George Smythe's Colour.
I'm sorry, you were just breaking up.
Yes.
There was a book published by George Smythe, with the Admiral Smythe. A book about coloured stars, pages and pages of coloured stars in it. This is again in late Victoria.
Double stars, all different.
Yes, I think I have a vague memory of someone showing me a colour chart that relates to stars, because people contact me all the time when they see a colour wheel or a colour chart, like this book today that's sold today. So I get to hear about it, and I have a vague memory. There wasn't time for this today, but when you go into the 20th century, I've seen books on color theory, and they depict color as if they're planets, sort of, somebody trying new ideas to go away from the color wheels, and it's like planets hovering in space. I managed to squeeze that into my book. But yeah, I think I have seen some of those charts.
I've got a question. As we come into the 20th and 21st century.
Who's this? I can't see who's talking. David? Is it David?
Me, yes.
Hello.
Hello.
The queue.
In the current age, the digital age, we have a whole new world of colour issues and representation of colour in digital devices, which creates lots of opportunities, but also lots of problems for anybody who's bought clothes on the catalogue on the internet and then find when you open the parcel, it doesn't look anything like the picture on the screen. But in astronomy, it also manifests itself through the different color palettes that people use to represent astronomical photographs, particularly of what people believe are colorful objects in the night sky.
I know, and they look so amazing, and they keep winning prizes, and they look, all these nebula, of course, they're as Robert tells me, they're all, of course, enhanced or somehow altered in order to see the contrasts and to see,
And we probably have no idea what these would actually look like.
No, but it's
close and looking at them. So we use our imagination.
Yeah, but it's like a new romantic age. These are very popular books at the moment. Astrophotography is a real thing, and of course, a lot of it is enhanced. Yeah. Sorry, Pat was raising her hand.
Yes, I mean, going back to the. Sorry, George.
Steve Knight was next, but go ahead.
Okay.
No, Pat. Let Pat go next. I'll go after Pat.
I was just thinking about each color is a wavelength, of course, and we don't. The color is not an actual color; it's a wavelength. Now that goes into our eyes, and our brain makes the wavelength into a color. And I do understand that everybody sees color slightly differently. So a blue, the type of blue that you see may be very slightly different to the type of blue I see, because our eyes are different. I don't know if you have any comments or you've looked into this this philosophy before.
Yeah, I sometimes have to deal with that. And most color writers think about this, and Goethe did. And to his credit, his work is almost unreadable and he's too much up himself, but he does have an awareness of the connection between perception and anatomy, the anatomy of the eye. It's a fairly recent understanding that we have how the cones work and how light is, how color is produced. But he is acutely aware of that, and how we perceive color is influenced by so many factors. Yes, of course, with our anatomy, and color blindness, for example, which is a defect in cones, I think much more common in men, but also, and probably more often than any other way, it's where you see a color and in what light conditions and on what computer screen, all of this. And that goes back to, the digital age. How do we see things? It's what I want my students to understand, to question an image, anything you see through various filters and screens, and, how that works. Yeah.
Yeah, if we go back to the old style of photographs, then slides, of course, we all used slides at one time, where you're looking at refracted color, and photographs, printed photographs, are reflected color, and the whole thing is quite differently there too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So if we've done nothing but at least raise the awareness of that, I think then we've done a good job. Yeah. And also to understand how much is involved in creating a physical pigment, how much, now I know a few artists who make their own pigments and paints, but not very many.
I used to.
Oh, great. Great. I mean, I do know a lot of people who love making pigments from scratch, and they go around scraping bits of mud from London streets and create it's fantastic stuff. A lot of these are organic as well. So that's having a bit of a renaissance, but I think, any school child will grow up with, a watercolor box.
Okay, so if we can go Steve, Brian, Mark. Popular speaker.
Thanks, George. Great talk, Alexandra. Really enjoyed it. I've been thinking about colour for the last 90 minutes, and that hasn't happened for a long time. Normally thinking monochrome. One theory is the wrong term. Something I read about was there was this theory that the Greeks could not perceive blue. They didn't have a separate word for blue. Apparently this is from Homer. Yeah. And apparently an early proponent of the theory was Gladstone. So, anything a politician says, it tends to be true. I think, so is there anything in that?
Yeah, I do get this question quite regularly. And I think, didn't he say that there must have been a genetic change or something, or somebody, or that theory is doing the rounds now, Now, do we change that quickly genetically in a couple of thousand years? I wonder. Given that I have a background in linguistics, so I studied languages before I studied art history, I think it comes down to language and how we perceive. Of course, language, creates the world and the world creates language, but I think it is a question of that, because this idea of blue, just because we don't have the color word, or that particular color word blue, doesn't mean, of course, there wasn't any blue, or they couldn't see any blue. It was just expressed in a different way. And I think in Homer it's the wine dark sea that they were talking about.
That's it. Yeah.
So it's not the blue sea or the green. No, the sea of course isn't blue, but it's quite often depicted as blue. So we think of it as blue. So rather than saying the sea looks green, they say it's wine dark. So then you need to, it's all about concepts, linguistic, it goes into neurolinguistics as well. And I'm not an expert on that, but it's how we perceive the world. Of course they could see blue. But how we describe the world is a completely different matter, and you probably have to invite a neurolinguist to that. But I would put it down to linguistics. I really would. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Brian. You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry, hello. So when Pat asked that question about the wavelength of light being related to perception of colour, I was just going to say that it reminded me of my first job, which was I was involved with a research group that was researching the visual cortex at University College London, and I was working for someone called Semir Zeki. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's
no, but UCL were the first ones who ever invited me to give a color talk, and I was so nervous. This is many years ago.
Oh, okay.
They wanted me to talk about color photography, and of course I knew nothing
Right,
about
okay.
Maxwell. So I just gave
Gosh, that would have been intimidating.
Oh my God. So I just said, look, this is what led up to Maxwell. Then you take
okay.
But yes.
So he's very interested in the use of art to understand the visual cortex. And so what I was employed to do was to write computer programs that stimulated people's brains while they were sitting in a brain scanner, PET scanner. Mm-hmm. So we would have, for example, one of the pictures the experiment was to stimulate V4, which is the color visual center of the visual cortex. Mm-hmm. And so half of the experiments were showing a picture by Mondrian, with the squares, and the other would be an equiluminant monochrome version of that. Mm-hmm. So to understand the visual cortex. But he was very much into the sort of Edwin Land theory of color, and that the perception of color is much more complex than simply the measured wavelength. It's all to do with the surroundings as well, and the illuminance, just exactly as you said. And I was just commenting on that the colors that we perceive, it's not just about the eyes, it's how it's all constructed in the visual cortex. The brain is making making all that construction and all that perception. Yeah.
Yes, I would agree. And you can see how, as beautiful as these color books are, the early literature on color, and I wish we knew more from the classics. And there are some sort of color theories, but nothing illustrated. They're quite crude, because nothing, not even 660 tints hand colored by Moses Harris can actually completely give us the whole, not even a color globe, not even the CIE diagram, or nothing really captures the whole the complexity of color, of course.
Of course, yeah.
And maybe we can only do certain things, such as how do we respond, or what do we associate with a particular thing or idea.
All the emotions associated with it. He was interested in synesthesia as well, where sounds can stimulate colour and vice versa.
I'm just getting into that because in the early 20th century, alongside Kandinsky, there's a lot of really wacky stuff coming out. And these are the books that are worth collecting now. And a lot of these are written by women. And they are pretty mad, but interesting ideas. And this is what people believed at the time. But, the Theosophists got in on it, and then talking about auras. But it's all valid historically, And some of it comes back again and again. The whole music thing comes back again and again. Really fascinating. Yeah.
We had Oliver Sacks in the lab, and we also had Sir Francis Crick as well.
Wow.
I remember having a conversation with Sir Francis Crick, discoverer of DNA, about the Levian illusion. So I programmed the Levian illusion, and so that when you looked at this color, circularly symmetric thing with spokes, you could actually perceive motion, even though there was no motion.
Yeah.
And actually, when a patient was shown this Levian illusion compared to the control, it actually stimulated the V5, which is the motion detection part of the visual cortex.
That's not a million miles from the Bauhaus group, wanting to relate color to shape, really.
Yes, it's all interlinked, so complex. It's not so easy to simplify. Yeah. Anyway, thank you. Sorry, bit of a conversation there.
We've now got a question from Mark, and then...
Well, Brian kind of stole my thunder. I was going to ask about synesthesia, and if you had any comments about that, between the relationship between music and color, if there was any link with that.
Well, I mean, it's a very old idea, as you can see. Even the scientist Newton believed in this, and I've only just started really looking into that with, at greater depths, and I'm hoovering up books on that subject matter, and especially on the idea of creating color organs. So I've just been given something from the 18th century, and also something from the early 20th century, people who actually built color organs, who believed in this to such an extent that they thought they could play color music. So I'm only at the beginning of this, and personally I don't experience synesthesia, but I've had so many people tell me about it. I just want to learn about it, and maybe that'll be a new talk. And I've also got a color man here in Lewis who has an old jukebox, And he has this idea that we should create a color jukebox, which is like that first 18th century color organ that was then, and another one was of course built in the early 20th century. So I'm at the beginning of this.
Oh, well, good luck.
But yeah, it's early days.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got another question from Pauline. I think we may have to give Alexandra a wee break there.
I think I need to see Corrie on +1. I'm so British now. I've just become a Brit, so I need to watch this 60th anniversary.
Pauline, you're on mute, Pauline.
Pauline, you have to unmute yourself, or shall we do it? Can we do it?
It's all right. I'm
okay.
Something about back and forward from mute, unmute, mute, unmute. I'm unmuted now. Yay.
Yeah.
No, I just thought I'd point out this wonderful book called
lovely, Colour of the
Stars by Paul Murdin and the famous astrophotographer David Malin.
Oh, I know Paul Murdin. We should have been on the same panel, but he was too unwell. It was at the, I don't know, at one of the literary, Cheltenham. Yes, he came.
It's signed by him.
Oh, lovely, lovely. Yes, I met him at Greenwich at the Moon Conference. How lovely. Yeah. I shall look out for that.
But I just wanted to point out in the book, it's got a list of Admiral Smythe's star colours, and the epithets he used, he's got apple green, ash colour, beet hue, cherry colour, cobalt, creamy, crocus, damson, dusky, emerald, fawn coloured, and these are all the colours that they actually.
These are the colour names, and it's interesting because that really is my field, and you can tell that most colour names do not refer to the pigment.
No.
With the possible exception of cobalt. Cobalt is a pigment. A lot of them use plants, flowers or minerals as references. And there are some wonderful books on the naming of color, of course. But that's why Moses Harris is so relevant and serious, because he was an entomologist. He realized the natural world has to be the measure, of color. But flowers are the most common. Flowers and plants are the most common names for colors.
Thank you for bringing him to our attention. I'd never heard of him before. Moses,
yes. Well, I'm still on a high seeing this, on screen live, and it went higher and higher and higher. It's absolutely amazing. And then I got called, and it was great. He deserves it.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Okay.
I can see another hand. I can see Anne.
Yes.
And MJC.
Richard, did you want to?
I just wanted to thank you so much for coming, and you've given the most wonderful talk. I will be emailing you because I've got lots of questions myself, so I might put them to you in an email. But thank you so much. It's absolutely wonderful.
It's been lovely. It's been really lovely. It's great speaking, because I was touring the country with Robert and the Moon Book in 2019, and it was so nice meeting so many scientists. And I was always a bit nervous with the scientists, and then Robert was always a bit nervous when we went to art groups. But it's been such a wonderful. And then everything stopped because of COVID, and it's such a tragedy, because I love going to places and seeing new places and meeting the people. Yeah.
Anyway,
thank you. It's a wonderful talk.
Thank you. So MJC.
That's Malcolm here. I'm curious, why are there 3 primary colours? When you start with the spectrum, you divide it into so-called 7 colours. You combine them again, you get white. Why are red, green, and blue sufficient to get you back to white?
That's just how you can bring them all together and they would form white. It's just the primaries in digital or in immaterial color are different to the ones in material color. So that's all I can, that's how the digital or the immaterial world works. And
print, in terms of light.
Yeah, I don't know why that is, but that's just how it's used. And in
I know, like television monitors, it can have 3 guns, and you get the colours perform
Yeah.
all the other colours.
Yeah, cyan, magenta, and something.
Yellow.
But that's in the print colors. So it's different in different disciplines. But in the paint box, the primaries are red, blue, yellow. But there are other theories. I mean, Goethe thought there were only 2 primary colors, and that everything else can be derived from them, and they were blue and yellow. So there's lots of different concepts, but if you play with the paint box, that's what they are, really.
Oh, thank you.
Mm.
Oh, just one other frivolous point. Did anyone notice the 6 UFOs in the Titian painting?
So what the
6 UFOs in the top corner of the Titian painting?
Yes, I did actually. Yes.
No, I shall go back to that. I'm sure we can find an answer because of course the Titians made, they reopened the Titians that shut down. And that Titian, they sometimes move between Scotland and here, but they're currently all in London, so we need to go and see them. So yeah, I shall investigate. I'd never thought about that. I'd always just looked at the pigments. Interesting. Mm.
Okay, I think if we can, gosh, I would say thank in the usual way, probably in the electronic way nowadays, which is the old electronic hand clap.
Oh, nice.
Free to use the old-fashioned way.
Oh, lovely. Thank you all for coming.
Once again,
thank you very much.
Fascinating talk.
I think I'll be buying your new book.
Thank you very much.
Oh, that would be nice. I've got to. Yeah, that was a labor of love. It really was, the color book, and I'm so glad I've got that. It's one of those things. But I'm also happy about the Moon book with Robert. It's opened so many doors, and it's really wonderful getting such different audiences. Yeah. And
the 50th anniversary as well.
Yes. Yeah. Well, Robert and I did it because we both turned 50, so we wrote a book.
I was born 2 weeks after the moon landing.
I was born 2 weeks before, 3 weeks, something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you know what it's like.
You look a lot younger than I do. I didn't think you looked 50 at all. Thank you anyway. It was wonderful talk.
Okay. Lovely.
Okay. Well, we must let you get away and see either EastEnders or Coronation.
Corrie. I'm a Corrie person.
That's a lot of illusions about you now.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
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 Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
We're not going.
Oh, okay.
Let's have like a 10-minute break now. So we'll get together at 9:25, where we've got some a couple of interesting things to show you, plus explosions and stuff like that. But we will aim to finish before 10 o'clock.
So I just want to hide that. I can't hide the video panel. How do I hide the video panel? Okay, so some of you, most of you probably are aware that on Wednesday there was the first test of SpaceX's new launch vehicle, or part of it anyway, the Starship. So I was one of those people, many people probably, who stayed up fairly late to watch that. And it was very, very interesting and very exciting. So this is a short talk about that. So just for some background, Starship is the next generation launch vehicle that SpaceX are developing. Probably anyone who's interested in spaceflight is familiar with the Falcon 9, which is their kind of workhorse launcher. They've also launched the Falcon Heavy, which is kind of 3 Falcon 9s strapped together. But Elon Musk has said he doesn't really want to put much more into that, and he's more concentrating on this machine here, which is collectively called Starship. There is the bottom half, you can see the cursor there, is a thing called the Super Heavy booster. And the top part, starting about where these fins are, is the Starship proper. This whole thing is enormous. It's 120 meters from top to bottom, which would be about the size of a normal Olympic running track. It would probably fit inside a football stadium, but not leave much space. And both parts of it are designed to be fully reusable. This lower part is designed to return to a landing pad, just like the Falcon 9 does. And this part is designed to land as well. So the whole thing can be reused. You just need to restack the two parts and then launch them again. This is a sort of idea of a starship, and this is the part that we're going to see today. This is 50 meters high, and it's 9 meters in diameter. Now that's about the height of a 2-story house. Another way to look at it is if you parked 2 normal sort of estate cars nose to tail, they would fit neatly across that. They're about 4 to 5 meters long, so 2 estate cars across the bottom of that. It is huge. And it's designed to carry 100+ tons into low Earth orbit or to places beyond Earth orbit and indeed beyond Earth, like Mars. And that is something that Elon Musk is very keen on. It uses this latest generation of engine, which is called the Raptor. This is the latest model, and that's a person standing beside it, and you can see how big that is. Technically, it's known as a full-flow closed-cycle engine. I don't want to go into the techniques of the details of that, but basically it's to do with how the pumps that pump the fuel and the oxidizer into the combustion chamber are actually driven. There's various ways of doing that, and this is a particularly new one which has never been really tried before. It uses liquid methane rather than kerosene or hydrogen as the fuel, and liquid oxygen. As I said, only 3 versions of this type of engine have ever been developed, and the Raptor is the only one that has ever flown anywhere. None of them has yet flown into space, although the Raptor will almost certainly be the first one to do that. And that's it, test firing on a test stand. Fairly impressive flamethrower idea. Massive great jet of flame. Reasonably smoke-free and pollution-free because its methane burns to carbon dioxide and water, so there shouldn't be too much pollution from this particular type of engine. So all this is happening in a place called Boca Chica, which is in Texas. Actually, it's only just in Texas. If it was about 5 kilometers south, it would be in Mexico. It's really close to the border on the Gulf of Mexico. And that's a good place to do rocket testing because there's not much population around there and you can launch things over the sea. And so if something goes badly wrong, nobody's going to get crushed by falling chunks of metal. That's a more of a close-up of it. There's the actual site here. The US-Mexico border is along the river, the Rio Grande, which comes to its mouth here. And that is literally about 5 kilometers away from the launch site. The nearest human habitation is up on this island here, South Padre Island, and there's also a small port here. And there are a lot of people living in this area, well, some people living in this area who are SpaceX fans, and they have webcams continuously monitoring the site and looking at what's going on. And you can find them on YouTube if you want to. If you Google SpaceX Boca Chica or something, you'll find lots of sites that actually have continuous coverage of what's going on there. And I've stolen 1 or 2 of the pictures from those places for this talk. So the first tests of this machine were done using this very basic looking rocket body called a star hopper. It's been unkindly described as a flying grain silo because that's kind of what it looks like, and it's about the right size for that. It has a single engine, these Raptor engines mounted in the bottom. And this is a picture stolen from Boca Chica gal, who is one of the people who monitors this site regularly. Now, I've got a couple of videos of this. Now, I have to apologize, the audio doesn't seem to have recorded very well, but you can see the video. The audio starts out okay, and then it seems to fade out, and I'm not sure why. I've only just started learning to do this, but I'll play the video anyway, and you can see. This is a test of the first short hop, one of the 150-meter hops that this thing did. And you can see it's taking off. The engine is mounted off-center, which is why the jet is off to one side and pointed in a slightly funny direction to get the thrust through the center of mass. There's a camera in the engine bay, so you can watch the ground going past underneath, which is really cool. And it just hovers a bit and then gradually descends towards the landing field, which is only very close to the launch point. And it quietly settles down onto the ground and the engine's shut off, and that's all very nice. I think this was videoed from a drone that somebody was flying near the site. So that's how they got that record, and that's it sitting down on the ground there. Oh. So that was one of the preliminary tests. Now this is a picture copied from the SpaceX feed on Tuesday this week, when they had an aborted takeoff. And this is the Starship top part proper, which looks absolutely fantastic. It's a true Buck Rogers spaceship in my view, and I think Elon Musk should get an artistic prize, if nothing else, for recreating a 1950s science fiction spaceship. I think it's absolutely superb, and it's made of stainless steel. It looks like a proper rocket with fins and everything, and it's fantastic. So it just sits on this stand. This one's got 3 engines in the bottom, and some of the stuff vents through these various valves on the side. And there was a roughly 6.5-minute flight on Wednesday, which, if you've seen the news, you will know did not end particularly well. So again, I recorded the video of that from the SpaceX feed, and what you'll see is 3 camera views, one of the external view, and then one from the body of the rocket, and one from inside the engine compartment again. So I will play that. I made a few comments during the course of it, which hopefully will come across, and just briefly explaining what's going on. So this is all about 6.5 minutes of video. If I play that now, you can just watch it. One thing you'll notice is it actually goes up quite slowly, because obviously they're not trying to go to orbit. They're only trying to go to about 12 kilometers up. I hope that's playing all right. George, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see that okay?
Yeah. I noticed the sky is that ultramarine or
possibly. To be fair, the sound during most of this was just a roaring noise, so you're not missing all that much by not hearing it.
I hope we see some green later.
Just before that happens, you'll see a lot more movement on the engine balance to try and adjust the attitude of the spacecraft prior to the shutdown. There was a comment that the engine bay seemed to be on fire, but apparently that is just residual gases from the shutdown engine just burning off in the interior. I would imagine everything in there is well protected from flames.
Is it still climbing or descending?
Just climbing slowly, yeah. Yeah, it's very hard to tell. If you look on the top right, you can see the ground still gradually dropping away. Climbing at this point, and they're traversing sideways, slightly out to sea for safety. You can see from the direction of the condensation that it's not really going very fast, just moving sideways. Position for descent, and then the final engine will be shut down. You can see the attitude control jets at the nose there firing.
That's Fireball XL5.
Yeah, it's worth remembering this thing is about the size of a 12-story building, just falling out of the skies.
Chris, can I ask you a quick question?
You wait till the end of the video, John.
Sure.
There's your green, Steve. Yeah, this is where you miss the sound, unfortunately. Quite a loud bang.
That was bloody ingenious. Absolutely ingenious.
I take it that one's not reusable.
I don't think that one's going to fly again. No, no. Right. So, yeah, I think it annoyed me somewhat is that a lot of the media reports just describe this as a bit of a failure. But actually, I've made a list there of all the things that were successes, the things that are in green. And actually, with a prototype rocket like this, just getting off the launch pad in one piece is a success. But it did all those other things as well, including height record for those engines, the longest continuous firing of one of those engines. And it landed, well, it descended in exactly the right place. The only thing that failed was the third engine didn't relight. The green color apparently is due to some piece of copper eroding rapidly inside the engine, leading to what's known as engine-rich exhaust, which is not something you want in rocketry. So it was just going a bit too fast when it hit the ground and it blew up. But other than that, it was an amazing success, and Elon Musk tweeted that it was successful and that they got all the data they wanted. So yeah, I was a bit annoyed with the news reports about that. That's a picture of the aftermath, which looks like a scene from a Star Wars movie, one of those wrecked spacecraft or spaceships like the Death Star. There's a group of people on the left-hand side just inspecting the damage. I'll put that as a close-up on the inset. It just shows you how big the thing is compared to a person standing next to it. It's absolutely massive. So yeah, apart from a minor difficulty at the end, that was a very, very successful first test flight. And SN9 is nearly ready to launch. However, earlier this evening, I saw a report and a short video from one of the local watchers that SN9, which is being assembled in their high bay building, one of its supports failed and it kind of leaned over to one side and rested against the wall of the building. So I'm not quite sure what happened, but maybe SN9 isn't quite as nearly ready to launch as we thought at first. But it seemed to move very slowly, so it probably hasn't had much damage, and they'll probably be able to pull it upright again and fix whatever went wrong. So the next flight will probably take place early next year, and hopefully that one will be even more successful than this one. So there we are. That was SN8 flight test. Thank you. Sorry, John, you had a question.
Thanks. Yeah, no, I'm sorry to interrupt. Yeah, a couple of things. I watched it the following morning because it was getting quite late the previous evening. I wasn't sure how long before they started again. I noticed that when the first engine was shut off of the three, that it swiveled quite a lot. And somewhere I read or watched a video by some so-called amateur expert in the US about how these engines work, that they're only supposed to swivel up to about 15 degrees. I don't know if that's plus minus 15 or total of 15, but that one seemed to flip, and maybe I mistook it more than that. I was just wondering. And the second thing was, how on earth did they get the pictures higher up? I know NASA and SpaceX use these fancy cameras on these big gun mounts to follow these things, but that one looked at the wrong angle.
There was an aircraft. Apparently there was an aircraft, a NASA aircraft, which was flying around to get pictures, because NASA are very interested in this. I mean, that they have a lot of stake in SpaceX. So they were basically, they have an aircraft with cameras, which I think was where some of those shots came from. I mean, there were obviously one or two from the ground looking up with a telescope, but they had some aerial shots as well from the camera.
It's strange because I searched everywhere and I couldn't find anything about that at all on any of the SpaceX or other.
I haven't seen it either, but I mean the shots that they got must have been taken from the air, because you wouldn't get that view from the ground. Exactly. And there's quite a lot of amateur footage from people on South Padre Island and one or two other places that have got really good coverage of it as well.
Okay.
If you search on YouTube, you can find it. I'm sure it's not that difficult. About the engine, I think there was, those engines did move a reasonable amount, certainly when the first one shut down. And also, right at the end, when they were trying to land, you could see the jets moving about quite a lot. Mm. So they certainly gimbal a reasonable amount, and they have to use two to flip it back to the more or less vertical position. Initially in one direction to start it rotating, and then the other way to stop it again. And that all seemed to work really well. They've got that kind of attitude control with thrust vectoring down to a fine art, because they've been doing it with the Falcon 9 for ages now.
Sure.
And I think this was just unfortunate. I think Elon Musk said something about a lack of pressure in the header fuel tanks that they used to light the engines for the landing. Something went wrong with that. and that's one of the engines that didn't get the right fuel or destroyed itself or something. But I'm sure that's just a minor hiccup, and they can sort that out with all the data.
It was all about trying to find out what could go wrong and then put it right. So I thought it was brilliant.
Almost everything worked really well. It was just the last bit that it just went slightly wrong.
Yeah, thanks.
There is another video taken from just to the side of the landing spot, and you can see 2 engines firing, and then about 2 seconds before it touches down, one of the engines cuts out. So that's one reason why it fell even harder than they expected.
Yeah. I mean, those engines have got an amazing amount of thrust. Those Raptors are really, really powerful. And just to think, the Super Heavy, I think, will have 28 of them, something like that. I mean, that is such a big rocket that it's going to need all that thrust to get to orbit.
Yeah.
Yes. How does that rocket compare with the Saturn V? I mean, you think of the Saturn V as the biggie, don't you?
You do. I was trying to find that comparison just before we started. I couldn't immediately find anything. I'm sure there's comparisons which you could pick up on the web if you looked.
Yeah, I did find something. The F1 engine of the Saturn V is more powerful than a single one of the Raptors, but then, of course, they're using far more Raptors.
Yeah, there's only 5 F1s in the Saturn V.
Yeah, and they were the most powerful engine ever built, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, is there any advantage to using methane over hydrogen? Because surely it's more polluting to generate carbon dioxide than water.
There's an interesting story about that. The reason they went for methane is that they are aiming to go to Mars. And the point about that is that if you can send a particular chemical factory to Mars, if you can get subsurface water and use the CO2 from the Martian atmosphere, you can generate methane in situ and store it. So your ship that goes to Mars doesn't have to take all its fuel with it. It can actually use fuel to come back that you've made from resources on Mars. And that is a huge advantage. And that's why one of the main reasons why they're using methane. I mean, it's not quite as efficient as kerosene, but it's almost as good, and it's much denser than hydrogen, which means you don't need such big tanks for it. But the point about being able to generate it on Mars is the real key, I think, why they're doing that.
I think the other thing you've got to remember about most hydrogen that's used is it's obtained from methane. It strips the carbon out.
Yeah, the other problem with hydrogen is you've got to store it at 20 degrees Kelvin, which is really difficult and requires a lot of insulation, which is more weight. So taking all the fuel to Mars would be expensive in that sense. And you can send this kind of chemical factory on an unmanned ship, land it somewhere, and then you don't send your manned mission until you know that you've got enough methane stored in the tanks on Mars to get back again.
Or you could send a couple of cows up.
You could do that, yes. I'm not sure what they'd eat on Mars, but hey.
I think I may be wrong. There's another reason that the tank for the hydrogen equivalent power total would actually be far larger. So it's about space as well.
It is, yes. The Delta IV Heavy, which is the big heavy lift rocket of ULA, uses hydrogen, and that uses 3 big boosters strapped together, and that's a monster.
I think there's a website I found. I'm not sure if I got this right. I think it's called Everyday Astronaut. Does anybody know?
Yeah, that's. He's got a very good review actually. I've watched one of his videos this afternoon, describing and discussing the different types of rocket engine and the engineering involved in them. And so, yeah, that thing I mentioned about the closed cycle full flow thing is described very clearly in that. He goes into that and all the other types in detail. I didn't want to do that in this talk. It's much too complicated. But yeah, it's a really some quite subtle and very clever engineering involved in that.
Worth watching, definitely.
Yeah.
49 minutes, but it's very interesting.
Okay. Well, thanks again, Chris.
My pleasure.
I'm hoping.
Thanks, Chris. That was really interesting.
Well, I suspect most of you have probably seen that video already, but it's always good to watch it again.
Oh, I haven't actually seen that.
Is anyone seeing this?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine.
No, you're not shut. Oh, George, she's too sad.
Sorry?
She's too sad.
Tragic.
What? Sorry?
It's too tragic, I think.
Too sad.
Oh, yes.
Have us all in tears.
Yeah, this is a picture of the recent events that occurred at the Arecibo Observatory. I was hoping I didn't seem to want to show it. I wanted to start by showing the actual dome itself, but it doesn't seem to want to.
Maybe you need to drag it back to the beginning.
Oh, well, I don't want to show the beginning to start with. But I will do in a second if it doesn't start working. I'm not sure why it's taking time to download. Okay.
You might need to refresh it. YouTube seems to be caught in a buffering loop there.
So is there a way of getting around that?
Try refreshing the page.
I wonder if that'll work now. So this is the Arecibo dish. It's formed, and you can see somebody walking on the structure at the top that we'll be looking at in a second. It's formed in a sinkhole. The dish itself is about 100 meters across. It's made of panels of aluminium, 2 meters by 1. And there are 28,000 of them down the bottom there. And this is the aerial at the top, the receiving part of it all. And it was built in the 60s, been used heavily on the SETI program, but repairing it became a bit expensive. So there were discussions about decommissioning it and taking it out of service. But just showing this clip to give you an idea of the sort of size. So I think I'll just stop that and we'll go back to the beginning, which hopefully will work. Yeah, looks like it will. I don't know if the sound's coming through. That's the aerial structure. To give you an idea of scale, that thing weighs 500 tons. And this is from a drone. I suppose the good news was nobody was injured because nobody was up on the aerial or underneath it.
I was going to say black humour does require me to ask whether or not 006 was underneath it at the time.
GoldenEye was not being filmed.
Or being, yeah.
But the intent was to decommission it. But I think there was something like a few hundred scientists in the US was starting an action to just get it repaired. It's now the second largest in the world. There's one in China that's bigger. And of course, as it's built into a sinkhole, the dish is not actually steerable, although I think the aerial can be moved a little bit, so you can look at different parts of the sky. But quite spectacular, and I guess a real coincidence, there was a drone flying around at that time. It will now obviously be fully decommissioned.
It's sad, isn't it, George? That's part of our youth, isn't it, that place?
Well, yeah, it kicked SETI off.
Yeah.
Sorry, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. They should probably start at the EU. No, sorry, I didn't mean that. But yeah, it was sort of a tragic end. It would have been better, I guess, if it was just decommissioned and people moved on to, you know, the next radio astronomy thing. But
in the 2010 decadal review, they were already clear that the NSF didn't want to carry on funding it. They want to spend on lots of other things like, you know, perhaps Alma and Scar, these other things coming along. It just seemed to be the latest thing. They couldn't afford to put in the extra 10 million or whatever it was needed.
yeah, one of the wires that you saw explode on the support structure.
One of the world's most important observatories that tries to solve some of the mysteries of the universe is now trying to solve a mystery of its own. Why did a thick steel cable suddenly snap, damaging a key instrument? The Arecibo radio telescope in Puerto Rico is now silent.
That's impressive. You're speaking without moving your lips.
It's been a backdrop for Hollywood films, like the 1997 sci-fi drama Contact. And Kid Beauty?
It'll do.
And it's where James Bond stopped the villain in the climactic scene of GoldenEye. But Puerto Rico's Arecibo Observatory is more than just a scene stealer. It's home to one of the world's largest radio telescopes, acting as a giant ear to our universe. Until this week. On Monday morning, the facility was forced to close down after a cable supporting a metal platform above the telescope fell, tearing a 100-foot-long gash in the giant reflector dish.
The cable didn't really break in the sense of a cable kind of snapping, but it just sort of slipped from its socket, which is an even weirder condition. So we're still trying to get our engineering team to make assessments of that to understand the root cause.
The telescope, located in the middle of a forest, listens for radio signals from galaxies near and far. It's contributed to numerous breakthroughs in astronomy and played a major role in the SETI program, the search for intelligent life, even used by famed Cornell astronomer Carl Sagan to send an interstellar message. But now radio communication, both incoming and outgoing, will be silent for a while. Observatory technicians have been working around the clock trying to get the telescope back online, but it probably won't be a quick fix.
We still don't know. We're still making assessments, trying to understand really what caused the failure, making sure that we're restoring the structural capabilities. So at this point, we don't really have a bigger timeline on when that is going to happen.
Since it was built in 1963, the observatory has survived terrestrial hazards like hurricanes, tropical storms, and earthquakes. But it is otherworldly threats the telescope is on the lookout for, tracking asteroids that could endanger our planet. It's also been part of the search for other planets that may be able to sustain life. All reasons why the scientific community hopes it is back up and running soon.
We'll find a way to repair this particular issue and continue to move forward. We've overcome a lot in our 50-year history, from Hurricane Maria to a very recent rash of earthquakes to now this. So we're a pretty resilient bunch down here, and we're going to figure out a way to continue to move forward, doing exciting science for the world.
one of those plays you haven't heard of, but you've seen before, and you notice it as you
exactly
watch it on camera. There.
Yeah, I'm glad that there are people that are much smarter than I.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, Carl Sagan opened my eyes to SETI, and certainly in Contact, the movie. It was a joy to see. It's gorgeous. I hope they do get it fixed.
I got the impression that they're not probably going to fix it because they were not going to maintain it when the first cable snapped.
Yeah.
And then the second one, well, we all saw what the outcome was.
Hello, I'm Sunny Williams. I'm up here on the International Space Station. Now, I want to say where we are. So right now, we're in the Japanese laboratory. It's one laboratory out of many here on the International Space Station. It's actually on the left-hand side. If I was the International Space Station and I was flying through space like this, my left hand would be where the Japanese laboratory is.
That's very interesting. Is somebody playing this?
So now again, we're on the right-hand side, all the way on the right of the International Space Station. This is Columbus, the European module. It has science experiments all over. You can see it looks a little bit crowded. And here we do a lot of our medical experiments.
George, yours is the active window, so it would suggest it's coming from you.
George.
The video's moved on. Okay, it's dead.
It's very interesting, though.
Could I just say there might be some good news, though it might be long in coming. I was watching a presentation, a Zoom meeting presentation from the VLA recently, and one of the astronomers, or certainly one of the scientists involved, saying there's a whole lot of them getting together to try and ask if the NSF will actually refund a repair of it, because they say it's virtually unique still in tracking asteroids and other things like that. So there is a move afoot to try and get it repaired, but I don't know whether it will succeed.
I've noticed the same, yeah.
And it's got modern technology there. I mean, why would you want to build replace an old, was it 300 meter rather than a 500 meter?
60s, yeah.
Brand new, or relatively brand new.
Yeah, I've not seen much from the Chinese one, although, as you say, it's 500 meters, so it's bigger.
I think it has a different capability. The Arecibo could do some things it couldn't do. I can't remember exactly what, but like for radar and stuff, it was much better. But I was just looking around the net, and there does seem to be a movement to try to get it rebuilt, not just repaired. So like a new telescope. So we'll see what happens. I think there's a lot of people want to see it rebuilt. So if there's the political will, it will get rebuilt.
And the money.
And they could modernize it completely with the receivers, etc., I presume.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, compared to a lot of other projects, it's relatively inexpensive, to be honest.
And it's unique in having that nice shape there by nature, so you don't have to build all of it. And I gather it used to rest on vegetation, the aluminium panels. So quite a spectacular feat, and been working for what, 50 years?
That's in 63, yeah.
Yeah. So we shall see, but I mean, certainly initially the talk was it was going to be decommissioned, and then this happened. Anyway, on a more jolly subject, I think at 10 minutes past 10. Now would be a good time to finish. I think we've had a cracking talk on a slightly different subject, but with a lot of overlap into astronomy. And I'll look at all these blue star maps in slightly different ways. We've got the beginners meeting on Wednesday. So hopefully I will see you there. So I think at that point, it would be good to draw stumps, and can I say keep safe and look after yourselves. I can't see many clear nights ahead, but you never know. So thanks very much, guys, for turning up.
Good night, George. Thank you very much.
Bye,
everyone.
Bye. Stay safe. Bye. Bye.
I have to wait because when I go, it dies. Cheers, Bob.